All right, I'm still working inside the filled facepaths.ai document that's found inside the 07 fill stroke folder. And in this exercise, we're going to discuss the cap and corner options that are available to us here inside the stroke panel. I've deleted one of the segments, the upper right segment inside of what was formerly a circle. That opened up the path so that we can see the appearance of the cap options, and we'll also be able to see the effect of the corner options if we add a few corner points. Currently, we just have a bunch of smooth arcs, so no corners whatsoever. I'm going to add some corners using this guy right there, the pen tool. Now, I realize you haven't seen the pen tool yet. At least you haven't been formally introduced here inside this video series. But here's what we're going to do. Fairly simple stuff. Go ahead and grab the pen tool, which you can also get by pressing the P key. And if you're working along with me, click on that final anchor point right there. And then I want you to click back and forth like this, some pretty acute angles. And then I want you to open up things a little bit like so. So in other words, very steep, very steep, very steep, a little wider. So we have a less acute angle between these segments at this location. And that, by the way, ends up giving me different joins. Notice that we're seeing a different kind of corner at this point than at this point. A flattened off corner at one location, a flattened off corner on top as well, and then a spiky corner down here at the bottom. All right, we'll come back to that in a moment. We're going to start things off here at the end of the line. And these guys, both here and here, are known as end points because they have no more segments following them. They're associated with one and only one segment apiece. And that's where the cap options come in. Now, currently, the cap option is set to butt cap. And that means that the line is severed off right there at that anchor point. So the stroke ends at the point at which the path ends. If you want the stroke to wrap around, and in my case, I'm working with a 10-point stroke. And so we have half the stroke on one side of the path and the other half on the other side of the path. That means 5 points on either side. If we want those 5 points to wrap all the way around that anchor point, then we would go ahead and switch to round cap. And notice that that's going to affect both of my endpoints, both the one up here and the one down here as well. So it doesn't matter which anchor point is selected, you're affecting an entire path outline at a time. And you can now see that all 5 points of it is wrapping from one side of the outline to the other side of the outline. I say all 5 points because that's half of the overall 10-point line weight. All right, so this is great for extending the stroke around the path outline. But what if you want to stick with the corners instead of rounding off that stroke? Then you'd switch to this guy right there, projecting cap, which goes ahead and extends the stroke half of the line weight, but keeps it nice and sharp. So entirely up to you how you work. I almost never use projecting cap. I either stick with butt cap if it works out for me, or if I want to wrap around my stroke outline so that neighboring paths extend into each other, I'll go with a round cap. All right, the next thing we need to discuss is these corner options, and I'm going to zoom out just a little bit so that we can find our way over to these points right there. And notice that I have a couple of corners, as I was mentioning before, one of which is clipped off and one of which has a nice spike associated with it. That nice spike is this guy right here, the default setting, which is a miter join. Now, what Illustrator is doing is it's trying to apply a miter join if it can, but if things are getting too spiky, it goes ahead and cuts off that miter and turns it into what's known as a bevel join. And this is all determined by this limit value. Now, limit is only available when working with miter join, and by default it's set to 4x, which means that any corner can extend 4 times 10, so 40 points away from its anchor point in any direction. And what's happening is, at this corner point, the stroke falls inside of that 40-point limit, and at this corner point, it doesn't. And if it doesn't fall inside the limit, then it gets clipped away. So you have one of 3 options. One is to leave things the way they are, which I think looks ugly, to have a bevel join at one location and a miter join at the other. That's just unacceptable. Your second option, in order to fix the problem, is to go ahead and raise the limit value. And I'm going to take that to 10 times. And notice that goes ahead and solves my problem. However, we're getting an awfully long spike as a result because we can now extend that spike to 10 times 10, so 100 points away from the anchor point. And that's really just too far. So you could also move your points to a different location. So I'll go ahead and switch this guy back to 4 times. Like so, which is going to bevel things off. And then I can move that anchor point by dragging it with the white arrow tool. And that's apparently not far enough. I'll go ahead and zoom a little bit, and I'll drag it even further in. And at some point, once the angle between these segments is no longer so acute, you'll go ahead and bring back in your miter. Because notice that doesn't take care of the other anchor point. This one up here, we'd have to drag it inward as well, and then that messes up that anchor point, and we got to drag it inward. So you're going to have to make a lot of modifications in order to end up with reasonable miters, at least where this path is concerned. Your final option is to just switch out your corner setting. So you could switch to a round join, like so, and that's going to round off the corners, pretty obvious. Gets rid of the limit value as well, dims that value because it's no longer applicable. Or you could just bevel off everybody. And what I typically do inside of my illustrations is either work with miters or I work with round joins. I almost never use bevel joins. Just FYI. All right, the remaining options I'll mention ever so briefly because we're going to come back to them later. You can create dashed or dotted outlines using these dash line options down here in the midsection of the stroke panel. You also have this new option, notice if I hover over it, of aligning the dashes to corners and path ends. And if you've had any experience with your dashes not aligning properly inside of Illustrator, those days are gone. As you shall soon see. You can assign arrowheads automatically. Finally, 23 years into the development of Illustrator, we finally have decent arrowhead options. And then you also have the option of creating non-uniform path outlines. And we'll see what all of those options look like in later exercises. But here's what I'm going to do for now. I'm going to go ahead and revert to the saved version of this illustration, and that has special repercussions when working with multiple windows into a single document, and we'll see what that looks like in the next exercise.